I want to start off today's video with a little thought experiment. In our imaginary scenario, let's say that you've just been named GM of one of the NBA's 30 franchises. And just for the sake of argument, let's make it one of those in the middle in terms of TV market size. That actually kind of matters a lot, but for the moment, let's just assume we're somewhere like Phoenix or Minnesota. And in your first few days and weeks on the job, you as the GM have to decide which direction you want your franchise to go. Let's say that you've made a couple of playoff appearances recently, but haven't made it past the second round. You've got a couple of pretty solid players on your roster, maybe even a couple of all-star appearances scattered in there somewhere, but top to bottom, you're probably not ready to compete at the top of the league yet unless something really spectacular happens. Your recent semi-success means that you're not in the lottery, so drafting your way to contention is going to be that much harder. And in a salary-capped league and a city that isn't a free agent destination, throwing money at the problem isn't really on the table either. Your assets and flexibility are both limited, but everyone is still looking to you to make the right choice. I know this is a lot to throw at you on your first day, but hey, that's the job. So what do? The way that the league usually works, you've really only got three options. You could try and cash in the chips you do have and trade picks or younger players away to build as good a roster as possible for this upcoming season. Your team will probably be better in the short term, and if you play your cards right, you might even get a puncher's chance at a title. But there's absolutely no guarantee of that. And in the completely plausible scenario where it all falls apart, you end up right back where you started, but with no pieces to build with. But if sacrificing the long term for the short wigs you out, you could also just hedge your bets and try to make it work with the players you have. Because hey, even if you're getting swept in the first round, you're still making the playoffs. Option 2 keeps your team watchable and keeps all your draft picks. But hedging your bets also means that you probably won't be contending for anything significant anytime soon. And you won't be picking in the lottery. It's kind of the best and worst of both worlds all in one. But there is a third option. Since you clicked on the video, I'm pretty sure you already know what it is. But going down that road would be pretty ballsy, as it would require you to convince the fans of your brand new team to, how to put this, embrace the effort? Believe in the procedure? I can't quite put my finger on it, but I really feel like there's a thing for this. Anyway, if option number 3 seems like the best to you, then congratulations. You're in the company of a lot of sports executives over the past 10 or 20 years. Especially if you're a mid or small market team that probably can't pull in a top tier free agent, this style of team building is incredibly appealing because it's pretty much your only way of contending for any significant period of time. But this is the NBA. There's a draft lottery, which in this case is incredibly inconvenient because it means there's no guarantee that a bad record will get us all the way to the top of the draft. But we definitely do want one of those picks. If we're going to sell our strategy to our new fan base, it would help a lot to have a top prospect for them to get excited about. So in an effort to make that scenario as likely as possible, and to bring in as much talent at one time as we possibly can, we're going to go for the nuclear option. We're going for door number 3, but then even a little bit past that to door number 3.5 or maybe even 4. This isn't just a rebuild. This is an organization-wide effort to strip this thing down to its bare bones so we can build it up into something great. It's not going to make us the most popular, but our first decision as GM of our new team is to tell everyone in the organization that for at least the first season, and possibly even further, we're going to tank. Tanking is about as common as it is controversial, which is to say that it is quite a bit of both. Very simply, tanking is losing on purpose to get better draft picks, because there's really never an incentive to lose games besides that. But there are actually a few different ways you can go about it. The one you see most often is an organization building its team in such a way that it's pretty much impossible to win, if not doing things within the games themselves to ensure that outcome more directly. There can be hard tanking, where organizations decide that they're going to try not to be competitive from the beginning, or there can be soft tanking, which is where a team might get to a certain point in the season having underachieved or experienced a big injury and think, you know what, screw it. We're just going to mail it in the rest of the way. The styles and reasons for doing so vary, but the common thread between all cases of tanking is being totally fine with losing games. That and the fact that it's probably going to piss some people off. With as many teams as there are trying it from year to year, you'd think that the NBA would be as progressive towards tanking as they are towards things like sports gambling or shirt sponsorships. But no, they really don't like it. All Mark Cuban had to say was that losing was the Mavericks' best option in 2018, which it was, for the record, for him to get hit with a $600,000 fine from the league. Now, Mark Cuban has a net worth of about $4.7 billion, which that fine was only about 0.013% of, so make of that what you will. but if nothing else, the find sent a message to Cuban and the rest of the league's owners that tanking was incredibly uncool, as did the changes to the draft lottery created in 2017. And you can make a pretty easy argument that all of that, from the league's sensitivity to Cuban's comments to the changes to the lottery, came as a response to the actions of one team, Sam Hinkie's trust the process Philadelphia 76ers. You can't really have a proper conversation about tanking without them, because while some other team a long time ago probably invented tanking, the Sixers under Sam Hinkie perfected it. Hinkie took over as the Sixers GM in 2013, where his first move was to immediately trade away their best player, Drew Holiday, for a first-round pick and Nerlens Noel, man after my own heart. But after continuing to systematically rip the roster apart for a while, the Sixers had the worst team in the league, finishing in the bottom 5 in the NBA in 4 of the next 5 seasons, and putting together the second worst record in NBA history for a full 82-game season. But as controversial as his methods were, even within his own building, Hinkie's process did deliver them some pretty high-level talent. Sure, there were a few Jahlil Okafors and Markelle Fultz-shaped mistakes in there, the second of which came at the expense of drafting Jason Tatum instead. Oof. But before that, the Sixers were at best a hodgepodge of second or third tier players like Andre Iguodala and Lou Williams. Whether you think they succeeded or not, Hinkie and the Sixers set out with the intention of making them more than that, and at the very least, he gave them a few golden opportunities to become so. If nothing else, the Sixers set a new standard for what tanking could be and accomplish, so much so that many other teams across sports have implemented those same ideas. When Brian Flores was hired by the Dolphins in 2019, he and GM Chris Greer shifted into rebuild mode almost immediately, trading away players like Minkah Fitzpatrick and Laramie Tunsil for picks, and also dealing away as much cap space as possible. The Browns did the same thing a couple years before that, trading for a truly astounding amount of draft capital, while also reducing the team on the field to one that would put them in a position to pick top prospects like Myles Garrett and Baker Mayfield. In baseball, both the Cubs and the Astros won the World Series after basically burning their teams to the ground and building them back up from the players they drafted along the way. The more you dig into tanking, the more you realize how ubiquitous it actually is. Going all the way back to the 1984 draft, the one that had that one guy, the Rockets realized that they could keep Hakeem Olajuwon in town if they could just lose enough games. So they did, and the rest is history. There seems to be an extremely strong historical precedent for tanking, which would make me believe that it's a thing that can be helpful. But also, the strong negative reaction to it makes me question that. While the theory behind it seems sound, tanking as a concept seems both divisive and inconclusive. And as a channel that loves and supports the scientific method, that's pretty frustrating. If only there was a way we could test some of these ideas out a little more practically and simulate a situation where a team tanked to see if it might actually work. Before we get too deep into this, let me just clarify a couple of things. First off, this is not about to start being a gaming channel, so just everybody calm down. Second, and if you play a lot of 2K, you may have already noticed this, but I'm not using the most recent version of the game, because I already had 2K21, and we're not made of money around here. And I was too lazy to do a roster update, so we're just all going to deal with it and pretend like we're back in the fall of 2020. Not for any longer than we absolutely have to, though. But to make this work, and to fulfill all of our requirements from earlier, I've decided to put us in charge of the Portland Trail Blazers, which is to say that they're the team I've chosen for us to absolutely mutilate beyond all recognition. They're in a smallish market, have had some recent success that didn't amount to anything above getting swept in the conference finals, and most importantly of all, they've got a couple of really good players, and a few more above average ones, that should make for some very nice sacrifices. Trade pieces. And yes, I know that CJ McCollum plays for the Pelicans now, but remember, we're back in the fall of 2020. Just think of it like we figured out how to time travel. But first things first, we've got to start our destruction of this franchise from the bench, because while Terry Stotts, again, time travel, is not the most spectacular coach in NBA history, he is entirely too competent to be in charge of our team. So, sorry Terry, but you've got to go. Sometimes art imitates life, I guess. But the only man we want leading this squad in the short to medium term is... yeah, this guy should work. Now that we have someone aggressively unqualified as our coach, it's time to look at our roster because, oh man, do we have a lot of work to do. The Blazers were coming off their 7th straight playoff appearance at this point in real life, so we're going to have to grind if we want to undo all that success, which we very much do. Our goal here is to trade the good players we have on our roster for as many first-round picks as possible, but right out of the gate there's an issue. For some reason, the other teams in the league don't just want to give us their first-round picks, which is honestly so frustrating. Didn't they read the title of the video? Don't they know what's going on here? But yeah, it takes two to tango, and it took us a good long while to find a team stupid enough. A team willing to do a deal with us. Maybe word's gotten out around the league about what we're trying to do, but in any case, we finally get a deal in place to send Jusuf Nurkic and a second-round pick to the Spurs for their upcoming first, and Jakob Poeltl, who, candidly, we have no intention of keeping. Sorry to any Bosnian fans I might have out there, but Jusuf Nurkic is the first casualty of our rebuild. From there, we get on a little bit of a hot streak, and suddenly, guys start flying off our roster. Carmelo Anthony to the Bulls for their first? Done. Enes Kanter to the Hawks for theirs in 2022? Absolutely. Norm Powell to the Nuggets to make it 3? Yes, please. Now we're up to 3 first-round picks in 2021, and 2 more in 2022, and we're just getting started. CJ McCollum goes out the door for the Kings first, and Buddy Hield, who we will also be trading as soon as humanly possible. Our roster is now a shell of what it once was, but there's still one very big piece left on the board that we need to get rid of for our tank job to really get going. Damian Lillard is one of the best players in the NBA, which means that it's going to be next to impossible to get his actual value back for him in a trade. That and his giant contract mean that we're going to have to get pretty creative if we want to move him on. But I've got an unconventional idea that I think just might work. We call it the Warriors because, believe it or not, they're one of the few teams that actually have multiple first-round picks in the next couple of drafts, which is really the only thing we're after in trading Dame. They also have Andrew Wiggins as a salary make-weight, so if we can sell them on a Clay, Dame, Steph backcourt, which honestly shouldn't be that hard, we think they'll bite. And after a bit of haggling, they do. Dame and Anthony Simons go to the Dubs, and in return, we get Wiggins in an absolute haul of first-rounders. And Michael Mulder, but we're less excited about that part. We have thoroughly trashed the roster that the group before us put together, and replaced it with something truly horrifying. You might remember the Jailblazers of the early 2000s, what with all their Zach Randolphs and Sean Kemps and Rasheed Wallaces, but this group right here, these are the Failblazers, a team so awful that it would make Sam Hinkie blush. Now it's time to turn these guys loose and see what they can do, which, if we're lucky, is mostly going to be being terrible. I start the sim, and right off the bat, we've got a problem. Losses to the Cavs and Kings are exactly what we want to see, but then following that up with 3 straight wins, including... Wait, how is this happening? I know it's the NBA and anyone can theoretically beat anyone on a given night, but right now, JaMychal Green is our second best player. I thought I did everything I needed to do to make this team awful, but I guess I was wrong. Whatever, I'll let it sim a little longer and see what happens. Maybe it'll correct itself. Halfway through the season, we're 11-30, which is pretty bad, but I think we can do better. Or worse, I guess. I don't know, man. Everything in this video is backwards. Up is down, good is bad. Our team chemistry rating is back up over 50 again too, which is way too high for my liking. So I decide it's time for another purge. JaMychal Green, gone. Jakob Poeltl and Derek Jones Jr., double gone. Robert Covington for Bismack Biyombo? That doesn't make any sense, so of course we're going to do it. That pretty much just leaves Wiggins in the productive player category, which, now that I mention it, is absolutely worth taking a look at. Because how productive he's been up to this point is genuinely shocking. A quick peek at his stats tells me that Wiggins has come to Portland and turned into a demigod. Look at all those shot attempts! We traded for 2020 Andrew Wiggins, and we got 2021 Luka Doncic instead. And some GMs would see that and be like, he's only 26. Maybe we build around him instead. But we're not most GMs. Wiggins is too good, and he needs to go. We try and shop him for a first rounder, but once again, his contract makes that a little hard. The only offer we get for him is from I kind of just want to do this for the irony, but old man Kevin Love and his giant salary are definitely not part of our plans. So instead, we ship Wiggins to the 76ers for the sweet, sweet expiring contracts of George Hill and Danny Green. And once that's done, our work in destroying the Blazers is well and truly finished. 34-year-old George Hill is now the highest rated player on our roster, and I'm sorry, I told myself I wouldn't cry. It's just so beautiful. This group of players is an absolute nightmare, which is exactly what we imagined when we took the job. But more than that, a quick look at our salary table shows that not only is this team awful, but it's also criminally cheap. Between our entire 15-player roster, we only have $6 million total committed for next season. Honestly, if I could have this team consist of 15 vending machines, I would, but for the time being, we're more than happy to roll with the players we've got, because they stink. The first edition of the Failblazers goes an eye-watering 16-66, pretty easily earning the highest lottery odds as the worst team in the league. I'll tell you, early on, I really didn't think we were going to catch the Thunder, but by God, our boys did it. Phase 1 of the plan is complete, but now our fate is in the hands of the NBA's draft lottery, and she is a fickle mistress. The first 11 names get read off, and our pick, thankfully, isn't one of them. We get to the third pick, and... whew, okay. Still in the hunt. We've made it into the final 2, and... son of a... So, the lottery doesn't exactly go our way, but it's hard to be too upset about the second overall pick. We make a trade with the Thunder for the 4th overall as well, so all in all, we're pretty pleased with the position this tanking thing has put us in so far. The Pacers take Cade Cunningham 1st overall, which, yeah. But that means we can take Scotty Barnes at number 2. Then we take Evan Mobley at 4, and just because we can, we take Benedict Mathurin at 20, because he's in this draft too for some reason. Year 1 yields us some pretty foundational pieces, including the guys that would end up 1-2 in the Rookie of the Year voting in real life, which I know about because of my mastery of space-time, but now it's time to see how our young stars will do out in the wild. Year 2 of the Failblazers figures to be an improvement on the first, but not by too much. I hope not anyway, because we've got some big plans for this year's draft, including the guy we've kind of had in mind this whole time. Scotty Barnes and Evan Mobley start immediately, because on this team, of course they do, but outside of them, it's still not looking great. Year 2 ends with a 25-57 record, which is a 9-game improvement over last year, but it's still good enough, or bad enough, to get the 3rd best lottery odds in the draft. It's not completely ideal because, again, we have someone that we would very much like to draft near the top, but the big improvement mostly comes down to Evan Mobley making the All-Rookie team and 3rd-team All-NBA in his first season, which it's hard to get too upset about. We do want to be good eventually, after all, so having a guy break out this early while also being the 3rd worst team in the league is kind of the best of both worlds. But now we're back in the lottery, and unlike last season, hopefully this time the basketball gods will smile on us and... So the league office has clearly colluded against us to make sure that we don't get the number 1 overall pick, which was fine last year, but this year, Chet Holmgren is available, and if the Wizards or the Rockets take him ahead of us, I will probably scream. We trade up to 2 just in case, but realistically, there's no possible way that the Wizards aren't going to... Well, hot damn. Just give me a second here, and yeah. Chet Holmgren, out of Minnesota. Well, wherever he's out of, he's on our team now, and that's pretty exciting. We really didn't expect him to be there at 2, and we definitely didn't expect Paolo Banchero to still be there at 7, but we're not upset about either one. In just 2 seasons, we've completely turned over the Failblazers core, from one that was almost exclusively focused on Dame and CJ McCollum to a foursome featuring some of the hottest prospects in the game. Is that realistic? Absolutely not. Silly as NBA trades can be sometimes, some of the ones we pulled off were borderline nonsensical, but there are a couple of things about real-life tanking that we can take away from this fake scenario. The first of which is that tanking is a lot harder than people realize. We did literally everything we could to make our team as atrocious as possible, even down to hiring an awful coach and running a system that didn't fit our personnel, and it still wasn't enough to get the 1st overall pick in either year. In 2019, the Dolphins pretty much did exactly what we did, only to have Brian Flores coach them out of what looked like an all-time bad season. To some, that seems an awful lot like karma, but to me, it seems like proof of concept. Losing that much is actually harder than it might seem. Just like you have to commit to building a winning organization, you have to commit just as much to tank. The second thing I learned from this simulation is that tanking for a particular player is a fool's errand. Do you realize how much I stressed about the possibility of not getting virtual Chet Holmgren onto our team? It was way too much. There was so much that was out of my control, but he was still a big part of my long-term plan. I had contingencies, I guess, but they were very much in the break glass in case of emergency kind of category. Chet was the only guy for us, the last piece that was going to bring it all together, and had we not been able to get him, this whole thing might have felt like a gigantic waste of time. But this kind of thing happens in real life too. The 2020 Jets were doing their best to lose their way to Trevor Lawrence, and were on pace to do so. But a very inopportune win against the Rams, in Week 15, meant that the Jaguars jumped ahead of them in the race to the bottom. We all know what happened next, for better or for worse. The 2019 Knicks tanked their hearts out for Zion Williamson, only to have the ping pong balls bless the Pelicans with the number 1 pick instead. They dropped all the way to 3, which means that they didn't get Ja Morant either, which double hurts. If you tank with a specific player in mind, which a lot of times is exactly what happens, prepare to get your heart broken. But the last thing about tanking I learned from this multi-front investigation is that it absolutely, 100%, beyond the shadow of a doubt, is a viable strategy? I know, it surprised me too. It's never going to be the most popular, and people will always throw around words like integrity when teams use it, but tanking can put you in a position to turn your franchise around. The Sixers went from averaging under 20 wins a season to making the playoffs and being in title contention every year. And for as much crap as people gave him for it, none of that would have happened without Sam Hinkie. The Dolphins have had winning records for the past 2 seasons after nuking their entire team just a couple years before. Heck, even the Trailblazers turned things around. I simped one more season, mostly because I wanted some payoff for all that build-up to drafting Chet Holmgren, but you'll never guess what happened in year 3. The Trailblazers were the #1 seed in the West. They went 51-31. Mobley made another All-NBA team. Banchero and Holmgren were both All-Rookie, and the only team in the league that had a better record were the... Hold on a second. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. As far as answering whether or not tanking works goes, I think it depends on who you ask, but on that point, when we assess this kind of thing, we tend to put a pretty huge overemphasis on championships. And I understand that instinct. Winning a championship is the ultimate goal of sports, after all, but treating it that way discounts some of the best teams solely because they couldn't clear that final hurdle. Were the 90s Jazz teams or the early 2010s Thunder failures because they didn't bring home a title? I don't think so. If given the chance, I'm pretty sure every team in the league would bite your arm off to build a team like that. And when organizations decide to tank, the team is what they're building towards. The team can happen without the championship, but the championship cannot happen without the team coming first. And if you're in a small or medium-sized market, you only have so much agency in how you build yours. Tanking is not the first strategy that anyone would choose, but it is a strategy, and that's more than a lot of teams can say they have. In a lot of ways, it's pretty appropriate that the NBA has a lottery, even if it can be absolutely infuriating. Pro sports are pretty much all just lotteries, with teams having better or worse odds depending on the moves they make. Tanking works because it can give teams a better chance at that lottery, literally and figuratively. But more importantly, that means it can also give their fans something even more important: hope. Woohoo! You've made it to the end. Congratulations. I know that it was a bit of a journey for both of us, trust me. But if you like the content, please consider subscribing to the channel for more stuff like it. We kind of did something different with the 2K stuff this week, so if you like that or didn't like it, please let me know in the comments. We're still experimenting with what kind of content we want to put on here, and what you guys want goes a long way towards deciding that. If you want to support the channel, we also just added a couple of new, cheaper options to our Patreon page. I hope you consider joining, but in any case, that's all we've got for you today. See y'all soon.